It is one of the important elements in order to advance towards the implementation of the Escazú Agreement. In the first forum, we gathered elements for the elaboration of the first index that was presented at COP2. And after that, we had a public consultation of this amendment, and it was presented to the COP. With regards to the last process, or the last part of the process, it began on the 21st April of this year, and it continued until the 6th of July of this year. In general terms, the consultation has been very positive. It was performed through an electronic survey in the participative platform, and we also received surveys by email. The questions of the survey were on 4 elements: a global evaluation of the proposal, level of evaluation of the 5 axes that were proposed in the index, prioritization of the proposed action lines for each of the work axes, and of course comments regarding the elements that must be taken into account for the actions. The response of the public was very positive. As you can see, there were high responses on the platform, but there were responses also through email for a total of 237. The response were at the individual level as well as from organizations. You can see on screen the division by countries. In fact, the survey, the term of the survey was extended at the request and because of the interest to present information. So all of these showed us that there is great interest. Of course, in the future, there is the response to future surveys. For that, we will make sure that they are also disseminated in a more ample manner with regards to the focal points in the respective countries. We see here the responses to the surveys. In the first place, we have the level of approval for the proposal in general, and we can see that 51% believe that the proposal is very good. And of course, 34% believed it was good in general terms. In general terms, it has been very well received. Likewise, the 5 axes of work, in a very similar manner, they were equally very well accepted by the persons that participated in the survey. With regards to the evaluation and prioritization of the axes, we can see that with regards to the first one regarding knowledge, there is a very high importance offered by the participants with regards to generation of the diagnosis on the situation of the human rights defenders regarding environmental matters. This is very important to take into account and strengthen it in a following item if necessary. Also, there was a very good response with regards to good practices and national mechanisms on the responses. And with regards to the continuity of the Forum of Human Rights, it was in the same manner. With regards to the second axis relative to the recognition, we found that one of the most important points for the participants in the survey were the activities of awareness and campaigns of communication, followed by dialogue and exchange of information with justice operators. If we see axis 3 with regards to capacities and cooperation, we can see the importance assigned by those who participated in the survey to the directives for the establishment of individual or collective mechanisms for prevention and protection, and also technical assistance to the parties for the implementation of Article 9. I must say also that the 4 axes in the initial index was linked to point number 3 and 5, especially that it is now point number 4, because it was believed that support to the implementation should be transversal for all axes. it should be mainstream for all access. And we can see this in number 4. With regards to the fifth and last axis regarding following and revision of the action plan, there was importance given for the work group to continue to be able to follow up the application. Likewise, the mechanism of rapid response within functions for the compliance, application and compliance, and we will see how it has been included in the new draft. Constance, now you can explain about the suggestions and the changes made to the plan, to the index. Thank you very much, Juan Diego, and good afternoon to each and everyone. My name is Constance Naligan. I am the focal point of the environmental minister from the Escazú agreement. I am responsible as Chile, as well as with Ecuador, and well as San Cristobal and Nieves, to comply with a mandate given at the first COP at Escazú. The first Escazú COP mandated the party states to have a regional plan to be discussed and approved at the following COP that will be held in April of the coming year. And we had the good luck, as mentioned by Juan Diego, to be a proposal of the index that was very well received. As an average, more than 85% considered that it was very good. So therefore, that made our work more easy as co-facilitators, so that now we can propose the regional action plan. Within the comments and general suggestions, it was suggested to have intermediate reviews. With regard to the focus and principles of the action plan, we also received contributions regarding the extension, for example, with perspective of gender, with perspective of intergenerational precautionary measures, with a focus also with the agreement of Escazú agreement with regards to persons and in vulnerable areas, as provided by our treaty, and those that face problems to have their rights. Also, that we need the participation of the public. And as a more specific proposal for the improvement is to be more clear as to what is the extension of the application at the regional level, and also what application will be at the level of each of the countries. Also, to see how there was a difference in an access that phonetically it sounds very similar to the one that it's the knowledge and recognition, and also to see how we could articulate this with another initiative and the involvement of other interested stakeholders, and also to be more specific in regarding to certain mechanisms and follow-ups. In that sense, we discussed the conceptualization of the offenders, and we are, as you can see on the draft of the plan, talking about persons, groups, and organizations, and we are going to improve the introduction. Remember that we talked about the index, and this process has been advancing, and also is part of a more general context where there is a dramatic situation. Many of you know that last week we received a new global witness report. Once again, and shamefully and dramatically, we know that Latin America is the most dangerous region to defend the environment. The objective then was reformulated to reinforce this idea of implementation, and the execution plan is still the 6 years, and the follow-up aspect and the revision aspect is now incorporated for a previous review. With regards to the focus and principles, knowing that the regional plan is an accessory to the Escazú agreement, we have to reinforce all the principles, in particular the treaty, but it's not limited to those, because they are inserted in the principles of human rights, of international rights. There is special consideration, as we were talking in the group, for the persons in vulnerable position. And I want to say that this is a regional plan that has to have a sense for the party states. But as our Article 4.7 says, Escazú is an instrument. And in addition, we hope for each state to have more actions with regards to access and the rights of the defenders. We are also linking this action plan to the considerations with a focus of strengthening and cooperation in Article 10 and 11, but of course incentivizing additional resources. And we need, as Juan Diego said, we merge cooperation and national implementation so that it is clear that the national implementation is going to be strengthened through this focus. And the lines of action, I want to say that they were reordered just as they were prioritized in the public consultation. That is to say, now you are going to find a difference with regards to the order that was in the index, because now the actions are regrouped and prioritized based on the results of the survey. We now have for fair access knowledge to know what the situation is, to know what is the role of the persons and defenders of human rights, environmental matters, and their rights. And for that, we have 3 action lines. Diagnosis, as we said, as Juan Diego mentioned, that was the priority within this access. That is our first action. Also to give continuity and greater dissemination to this forum, and also to strengthen what we have from the observations as of principle number 10, that whose management is a responsibility of the CEPAL. First, the first strategic action has to do with the communication campaigns and awareness campaigns. We can have recognition of those leaders that are not now with us and those who are now developing work, and to have alliances in other forums, not only to discuss with those persons that are convinced of the role, but also to reach other spaces. With regards to strengthening of capacities and cooperation, this is focused on national implementation. We already have 6 strategic actions, such as alignments, to develop different instruments. You can remember that the Escazú is done according to the priorities and possibilities of the party states, but through legal instruments, administrative instruments, or others. But all of these sections are destined to the public, who are the subjects are those who are those public officials, in an exchange with other actors that are key, such as the defenders of human rights and operators of justice. And finally, these follow-up measures, evaluation and review that now contemplate for strategic actions, we can give them a permanent character, to this work group, and can facilitate what we will listen in our following session, our support committee, and also to reinforce this follow-up with the reports that we have to provide as party states, but also to do a regional uniform of the access of the component that is of importance to all countries. As the next steps, the first is the one that we will have tomorrow, where we are going to be working at the tables. Let's remember that at the previous forum, we had 10 work tables with the participation of over 140 persons that allowed us to have over 200 proposals. And these proposals, as Juan Diego mentioned, were the ones that contributed to our index proposal. Let's now, with the support of the Secretariat, and I thank them, taking advantage of the presence of Andrea Sambuesa, who was systematizing all of these forum contributions, we are going to now gather what we and all of the things that we do at this forum to prepare a virtual consultation, listen to your comments, to then have our COP3, whose principal mandate is the discussion, the consideration, and the option of this action plan, which is so necessary for the region, not only because we have legal imperatives, but also because we have an ethic imperative. Thank you very much. We are still on time, and we will continue with something that is of great importance to us, and Andrea will help us receive your comments, observations, and recommendations.
Hola, ¿qué tal a todos?
Hello. So there's still a few people missing. It's lunchtime, I realize that. But what I wanted to do is to combine us all, because although we might be really passionate about this, it's important that we be sharing the sense of urgency in the region. So as you said, there was the Global Witness report, which was just published, and the situation in Colombia is a tragic number. So if we're scared in Mexico with 54 last year reported in the report, imagine 60 in just 1 year in a country like Colombia. And we have this podium where there's Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia. And it's as if they were fighting for the first prize of ecocides. And so I think that organizers, I hope you can feel proud that this extended participation and the presence of women is very clear. And so I would like to insist that we should really use this forum, even if it's very passionate. It's very good to externalize the situations and how dramatic the situation that is being lived, because only in this way can the organizers of this forum and those who are carrying out this effort of systematization, this is the only way they will capture the sense of urgency. In Mexico especially, I've been saying it, it's a catastrophe what the federal protection mechanism is experiencing, where I am a beneficiary, and where each month, almost arbitrarily, protection measures are being removed from many human rights defenders in general, and many of them are environmental defenders. So the mechanism cannot be reduced to just small panic buttons and to private guards or bulletproof vehicles or to a refuge far from my house, and then returning people literally to the wolf's mouth, basically, where they're returning without any type of certainty. So I'm going to share it because I have lived this. So they carry out the risk analysis to a human rights defender, and then they say, okay, there's no more risk. The assessment says no further risk. You have had no incidents. And so then you go back. Yes, I didn't have risks or incidents because I'm not in my state. You can't say that I don't have a risk because there haven't been any incidents. And so I don't see my dear Alan here. He was here. Okay, there you are. Yes, really, just to create awareness that they can't be carrying out those analyses that are so short and so short-sighted. Really, there's human lives involved here, and where it's necessary for the circumstances, the Mexican circumstances, be taken very seriously. Yes, everybody says, oh, Mexico, oh, they have a mechanism, oh, they have a structure. But really, I insist the Mexican state and those that are in charge of the Mexican state need to be really step up to the plate. And so through you, Alan, there have been advancements. Yes, last month I had the opportunity. I am the first case but I'm still saying that I am the only case that has the Escazú agreement within my protection plan. So it is definitely indispensable that we move on to the next cases. Nuria is here. She's also a beneficiary. And so we will sit down right away to see how we can apply this. And in her case, it is a larger problem than in my case. Thank you so much. Can you introduce yourself, please? Good afternoon. I just wanted to, I'd heard your testimonial before, and if you could just introduce yourself again before. Yes, quickly. I'm a beneficiary of the Federal Protection Mechanism. I'm a journalist and environmental defender, and so I'm in the mechanism since 2018, and from this year I am part of the consultant board, and I'm a member of the Escazú National Group. My name is Laura Barranco. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Chine Morales. I've been living in Panama for 29 years. I'm from Costa Rica. I have a grassroots environmental organization here in Panama. And mainly, I am concerned about the fact that Panama, being a country that has signed an agreement, which today has become law, and still, as environmental defenders, we don't have that protection. So when we arrive at a public organization, because we need to go under other laws, in my case, because I'm a woman, I need to enter as under gender violence in order to have protection from the state. But when we talk about the Escazú agreement, government employees aren't familiar with it. And so we basically need to train them in terms of saying, okay, this is an agreement that Panama signed, but we don't yet have the protection of these environmental rights under the concept of the Escazú agreement. So at least in my case, as a woman, as a mother, I needed to enter under gender-based violence. And this is a concern, because if I wasn't a woman and I hadn't had the opportunity to have gender-based violence, which to protect me, I would be detained, because the government employees who were supposed to protect me are the same ones who were harassing me and threatening me. So I needed to elevate this to higher levels. So my career is environmental. This is also why I have a little bit of knowledge. But I'm concerned when I look at my daughters. We are rural women from the mountains, is our nature. And so here we're a little bit more dressed up because we've come out of our mountains, but we're very simple women, and that people see us as vulnerable, and that a government employee tells you, okay, you know what? I told you, stay calm, stay low profile, don't help anybody because things will go worse. And this is we as human rights defenders don't yet have that figure to protect us. So if I hadn't been a woman, I would probably be detained because I have a criminal note today as if I was a delinquent, which I am not. And I have my daughters here in Panama who have seen their mother being driven illegally by the same government employees who should be defending us. And so I'm concerned about when are we going to have the figure of an environmental defender so that we can really feel protected. Thank you. One more. So good afternoon. My name is Rigoberto Juárez Mateo Magajanjobal from Guatemala. And my question is, if in terms of you as representatives of the states who somehow opened up your will so that this project could become effective, not in every country. So what is the problem? What is the challenge that you face as people with goodwill for human rights to prevail? But what is the difficulty for the states to operate these agreements or the international tools that defend human rights, because the states are the main violators of human rights. But who is behind the states that's obligating them to say, okay, you do, and then the states comply exactly what other patterns say. And so perhaps an agreement like this one won't perhaps just stay on paper without even being able to be executed based on human rights. And this could be important so that we could understand what and towards where efforts should go so that human rights can prevail. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Juan Carlos from Bolivia. I think that we are in a situation of emergency. There are hundreds of our brothers and sisters who have been murdered. There's another hundreds who are persecuted and threatened. But talking about humans, but also there's other lives that are affected. Talking about biodiversity. And so within this framework, I wanted to put on the table for reflection. So although the route that we have been shown is that the action plan with the contributions that we will have now in 2024, they would be arising or they'd be put on the table during COP3. But we have data that showed us that the Escazú Agreement entered into effectiveness in 2022, and there are 5 countries that are building its implementation plan. So it's been several years that we continue to create mechanisms of how to apply this. And what would be your recommendation? Because it has a time frame of 6 years. So how? Because it seems that it goes through whether the state has the will to implement or not in the 6 years that has been proposed. And so I think that there should be, and this is my proposal, there should be an important role from the civil society to demand that our states really implement or carry out the implementation, because sometimes it's very easy. For example, in the case of Bolivia, I think it's the second country that has ratified the Escazú Agreement, but we don't have anything that moved forward in terms of implementation. And so this is something that's symbolic, but indeed it is a tool that we are using to make demands. But I think that we should have greater clarity in terms of mechanisms of how to make the implementation of this plan effective. Last intervention, then we go back for answers, and then if we have more time, we'll do another round. Mari, good afternoon to all of you, defenders of your territories, of our territories. My name is Miralay Huichalá. I am Machi. I'm here from Chile. I'm from the Mapuche community. I am a spiritual authority in my community in the south. At the same time, I fulfill the role of health. I work with medicinal herbs. I am in charge of our young brothers and sisters can speak our lost language again and to be able to rebuild after the great colonization in our territories, our Walmapu, our ancestral territory, our customs, our forms of dancing, our forms of praying and of talking with the nature that today we are defending. So I'm here with my sister and my daughter. We are defenders of the Pilmalquén River, a sacred river, a river that gathers more than 100 communities in the region of Los Rios, which is being invaded by a Norwegian company called Starcraft, a Norwegian business whose fakeness that has divided our communities, that has taken me to jail. So this business today is building a hydroelectric plant with 70% advancement, protected by the Carabiners of Chile, where we are treated as if we were terrorists. us, the ones who are defending the territory. And it's very sad, and I think that our history I think all of our stories as defenders here are very sad, but we have hope. This is why I'm here with my daughter, and I believe that a better world is possible, and that in these meetings, this is what we're moving towards. And so I want to say that I'm really sorry that this business with a double discourse in favor of transition in terms of energy and saying it's a sustainable energy source. And it's just such a shame that this topic is a topic that is causing this conflict, and that this is the root of why we defend our territory, because this energy transition is at the expense of the pain and the suffering of the indigenous nations that live in the territories that are being invaded. Because that energetic transition does not serve us, that electricity doesn't serve us, which moreover in Chile will go to other salmon fisheries that are also Norwegian. So we need to review also how businesses are working, the standards of human rights in our countries. It's very important because this gives us opportunity, and it opens up to other episodes where we can take action. And in our case, we have the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and this is very long processes that we could just be left underwater. We can be in jail while everything is happening. And just to say that when I read UN Women, it makes me very sad to have seen the Statkraft pages in Chile, where the general manager is at meetings at UN Women, just washing the image of the business. So here I make a calling to not have a double standard with us defenders, and to opt for the human rights of all of us. Thank you.
Bueno, primeramente, muchísimas gracias por lo.
So first of all, thank you so much for your comments. We have taken good note of everything you have expressed, and we agree on the importance and the urgency. And the first person who spoke, I believe your name is Laura, and obviously we are very grateful for the acknowledgement that this has been a participative process. And indeed, the idea of the action plan is precisely to try to serve as important support for a faster implementation of all of the obligations under the agreement. So it's important to take into account that this agreement is sui generis. It is a special agreement. It's the first agreement that for the first time legally, in a legally binding manner, recognizes the importance of protecting human rights defenders. So we have to give this agreement the importance it deserves. And sometimes the implementation of these agreements takes a minute, takes a little while. But actions like the action plan and your participation and your active participation in the consultations is very useful. So one of the persons who intervened, I think it was Mr. Juarez or Juan Carlos, you mentioned the importance of the public, the essential role to support implementation processes for these action plans and for the agreement in general and the implementation, so that these can all move forward significantly. And this, together with what I'm talking about, the action plan and all the actions that are being taken in different countries, there are countries that have routes for the implementation of national action plans, others that have certain tools, and this is moving forward. And the more participation there is from you and your voices, this will continue to move forward in a more significant manner. I don't know if you have an additional comment. Thank you, Juan Diego, and thank you all who have shared your testimonials. The reality in the region is disproportionate. So Lara was talking about the lack within the mechanism, but if we look at the 15 member states, there's only 2 countries that have a specific tool. So the task that we have before us is enormous. And lastly, the urgency also is enormous. And so, of course, the regional plan will not be the panacea. It will not be the only solution. It cannot be the only solution. And that's why it's so important tomorrow that we look at how the roadmap that Juan Diego was mentioning can begin a national level implementation. And we are recognizing, I think, that this is important, trying to look at the lessons that we have learned in terms of how to build the protection of human rights defenders and the self-care practices within the communities, the lack of trust that can exist with regards to police officers, for example. So it can't be that we are putting at risk the people, the defense plan putting at risk the people that we want to defend. So a very challenging question, which would be impossible for us to answer, which is what is the effort so that human rights can prevail? What are the efforts? It's a big question. And I think that we have at least a few clues. You're talking about the role of civil society and where our Escazú logic, we're talking also about the role of the public and how you guide us in terms of how we as public servers, what can we do? How do we demand accountability of tools that are already laws in our countries? And how do we continue training? I also want to, based on good faith, the idea that oftentimes government staff aren't familiar, and it's not that there's a bad intention, they just don't know. So how can we have good pressure amongst peers? So, for example, the fact that in each COP there can be accountability about what has been done with regards to this regional plan, which eventually we approve. And it could also be a way in which the international organizations could be aware of what is going on, how coherent we are being in terms of what we hope will be a fair socio-ecological transition, so it's not always the same ones who receive the loads and no benefits. And the Escazú Agreement also has a way of contributing in this safe context, so providing more information, guaranteeing participation also makes it such that the surrounding is safe and supportive, so that it's not necessary for people to put their lives at risk around this. So thank you so much. I don't know if do we have time for one more question? Yes, we have time for one or two additional interventions. There we have 2, 3, 4. Okay, yes, I saw you. So we'll finish in 15 minutes to start with the committee that is waiting for us here. Maria Jose Lubertino from the Network of Defenders of the Environment and Good Living from Argentina. So first of all, to thank you to the governments of Chile and Ecuador who've taken upon this task and this space for dialogue, but especially to share with you that we have been, as a civil society in the morning and yesterday, also women defenders in very active meetings, and that we don't want this plan to be simply a catalog of good intentions. So in the first place, to request through you the acceleration in the implementation of the plan. And secondly, there's a very good practice that at least we had been carrying out in the meetings of high authorities in terms of human rights within the Mercosur, and it's that we take as a common standard the best standard of the countries that make up the region. And I think that this is a great practice that could be adopted as a general criteria. And then the second point is, although here we are talking about human rights in terms of environmental issues, there is legislation in the countries in the region that talk about the rights of nature. There are constitutions, so I won't tell Ecuador, Bolivia. So to us, it seems that an intersectional perspective that includes this region must take in the standards and the principles of good living, which are common to all of the native nations, although the names change, Suma Camaña, Suma Kasai. But we must incorporate that perspective in our interpretation of what these defenders cover. And the other point that's very important and is indispensable is that we need the translation at least into the main native tongues. And we will have our specific contributions to incorporate the gender perspective. We're going to we're going to share this in writing because we've been working in systematizing this information. And lastly, because otherwise our secretariat here will kill me, I think it's very important that you take into account that it's not just about participation in the consultations. The states violate the participation mechanisms, the legal and constitutional participation mechanisms that we have. So when an environmental impact study is requested from the business that is going to carry out the entrepreneurial project, we are violating the criteria of objectivity in terms of access to information. So everything is connected with what we're discussing here. So it's not just about preventing people from being killed. It's more about preventing that there be circumstances that make that persons are at risk in collective and individual terms. And so the microphone's being removed from me. I'm sorry, but there's more words, and the idea is that everybody who wants to share can share.
Súper rápido. Luisa Gómez, del Centro para el Derecho.
Luisa Gomez from the Center for International Environmental Rights. Within the 4 axes that were presented within the plan, I am especially drawn to the second axis that has to do with recognition, because I think that we need to respond at least 3 questions: recognition of who, of what, and for what. And the recognition of who, well, I think we need to go beyond the individual leaderships. Sometimes this is placing the leaders in the eye of the storm, and I think that we need to think more in terms of collective recognition and in terms of group recognition. So of what? This access to, in terms of recognition, I heard a colleague from Colombia say that there was a very strict communication strategy approach. And so this should go beyond that, beyond the communication strategy. It needs to create a serious policy, in general a policy, that fights against ideas of stigmas, disinformation campaigns. We need the recognition of the tasks that environmental defenders carry out, of their needs and of their rights. And because it's necessary to carry out these, why is this important to do in these 3 areas? Well, because this will allow us to think about concrete measures. So, for example, it will allow us to respond to the question of why, what for is this recognition? And so above and beyond just celebrating them, this allows us to reach the heart of what leaders need. They need to be trained. Collectives need to be trained if they want to be. They need clear protection routes. They also need to put the topic of how this is a non-remunerated work, and the work precariousness of leaders is enormous. They don't decide to be environmental leaders. It just falls upon their lap. If they could, they'd just be chilling in their territories, but they have to leave, and they need to move forward. They need to push forward something that's not even paid. So that I think it's important for this work to be dignified and paid. And 2 more things. I think that it's also about recognizing this collective recognition of the groups also allows us to send messages to the countries that it's necessary to carry out adjustments in the national regulations to facilitate certain movements, and associations can have recognition, legal entity recognition, because sometimes without the legal recognition, associations, groups, and movements cannot function. And this is actually a strategy that is used very well by the very dictatorial governments. And just to conclude, the collective protection schemes of the recognition of those. My name is Mireya Pierre. I'm Panamanian. Welcome to all of you to my beautiful country, where it's really hot, but also very warm in terms of human warmth. And I'm always concerned in these events that oftentimes the people that in the territories that are affected by dispossession or by the accumulation with people being evicted from their areas, which is the implementation of projects that go against the lives of the persons within their own context. And it's very important. I don't know how, because I know that it's not easy. It's important to incorporate into these conversations and participation. It's important to include the simple people that live in these territories that are affected. And I'm saying it because, here in Panama we have had cases very famous cases, as is the case of my colleague Larissa Duarte, who didn't even have $100 in her pocket, and she was sued for $100 million. We haven't seen her for a while because her father was in a very delicate health situation, and she was severely threatened, and she was sued, and the rights organizations accepted it. But you see in these cases that there's also Ligia Artaga, who received a death sentence because of defending the lagoon of Matusaragati in that direction. Because sometimes these meetings is like meetings of eye and eye, but it's important to go into the field, into the territory. There's a lot more that I would like to say, but I know that time is valuable.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Maria Jose and Luisa and Mireya. These contributions for us have been very useful, but I would also like to suggest that beyond what the regional plan, many of you are from states that are signatories or not a part. So we come, for example, to go to the territory to have a translation of at least the Escazú Agreement, Maxumbu and Papanu, and I'm talking in the case of Chile, that would be important measures. But the implementation of the Escazú Agreement is finally the implementation of environmental democracy. And this is not something that is going to end in 6 or 10 years or 15 years, but we have to start now and urgent and with the urgency it deserves. So as co-facilitators, we are not going to reach our measures unless you contribute as you are doing now, and also to discuss with other parties, with other organizations. We need for this plan to be approved in March. It is very important. It is not going to be perfect. It is not going to answer each and every one of the concerns that you have, but we are working for at least to have the windows so that more specific matters or subjects could be then later implemented. We need to have this plan approved because if it is not perfect, it is not perfect, but it's going to lead us to a better protection. Thank you, and we're going to continue, and I will leave the word to Juan Diego. I will be here until Thursday or Friday, so anyone that would like to come forward, you can. Aiden and Paula, we are from Chile, and we are going to be here to discuss with us, with you. And tomorrow we're going to have a similar meeting as the one we had today. Juan Diego, the floor is yours. Thank you very much to all of you for sharing your experiences and also your ideas. This is what we want, feedback on this plan. I have heard very interesting things that I have taken note of to work on that. And the plan is not going to be the panacea, it's not perfection, but it is a plan, it is a first plan that will last until 2030, and from there we can evaluate it and to see how it has been implemented, and if all is good, we could be improving it on a permanent matter. We count on your support, and as Costa says, we will be here till tomorrow, so anything you would like to discuss, we will be at your disposal.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much to each and every one of you. And please, we will now begin with the presentation of the members of the Committee of Support and Implementation of the Escazú Forum. And they are waiting. I'm going to look for them, and please remain here. Thank you. I'll be right back. and I am the president of the Committee for the Support to the Application and Compliance of the Escazú Agreement. Thank you so much. We are very pleased to share this afternoon with you. We have been selected at the Conference of the Parties in Argentina in April of this year. We are beginning our mandate in principle for 4 years. And a system that we will change in different periods. In stages. 3 will remain for 6 years. Carol Stevens, Rita Olivetti, and myself will continue for a 6-year period in total. We have prepared a presentation to share with you as to what are the functions, what we have been doing since we were appointed, and then we were later sworn on August 10, and then we formally began our functions. And afterwards, to open a space for questions, comments that you may have. Thank you very much for being here. The first thing we will do is to introduce ourselves and for you to learn each of the members of the committee. Let's begin with our host, which is Panamanian, Felix Wing. Good afternoon and welcome to Panama once again. I hope that we are treating you well. My name is Felix Wing. For over more than 20 years, I have been an environmental defender, and so believe me that I come from the same places that our colleagues come, and I understand very well the challenges that we have. And I have had the rare privilege of not only being a strategic litigator on human rights, but also in defense of the indigenous populations here in Panama as well. And I have also held government positions in environmental management, and has been a legal operator. I has been an assistant of the magistrate of the Supreme Court in my country. I have worked. I am an attorney. No one is perfect. And aside from that, I have also worked in international organizations as a consultant. So I have a little bit of a background. And I think that can help me, and I hope it does. I have accepted this challenge very humbly because it is a great challenge, and we all know, we are aware of the expectations and also of the limitations because we have to recognize them. And within that framework, we will be very happy to be able to contribute to this important process. I was a negotiator of the Escazú Agreement on behalf of my country, and during most of the negotiating process, as well as Patricia, who was one of the co-chairs. She's not going to say, she's very humble, but yes, she's one of the mothers of the Escazú Agreement. We have to, she has the DNA of many of us, of those seated there, as well as of those seated over here. So, well, we have been the initiators, and you know that the beginnings are difficult, but they're also a very huge opportunity. And we're trying to do as best as we can, and believe me that we're going to keep the commitment during our mandate. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Felix. Felix and I are part of the Mesoamerica subregion. The subregion of the Caribbean has Carol. And Carol, could you introduce yourself?
For all being here. I'm very excited to be here. at this second forum for environmental defenders. My name is Carol Excel. I'm an environmental lawyer from Jamaica. I've been working and part of the Escazú process from the start. And so it's so exciting to now be a part of the committee as vice chair. My background includes working both with the government of Jamaica for over 7 years, including on implementation of regulations, laws, policies, and practices all across the country of Jamaica, and then afterwards working with civil society organizations on actually supporting implementation of rights to information, participation, and access to justice. So for me, this is, I'm very privileged and humbled by the opportunity to work on this committee, and very excited to see what we can do to support the implementation of this agreement, both in...
I am a lawyer, but I am now retired, and before I retired, I was a judge of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. Since retirement, I have been doing my own thing, writing, and taking a very active part in environmental matters. In fact, I'm a lawyer for a group who is challenging some developments in Grenada. And I feel very strongly about environmental matters and that basically the land belongs to everyone and that we all have a responsibility to ensure that we use our resources wisely and well, bearing in mind future generations. I am very happy to be here. I trust that I might be of some use. I do have some background in relation to how difficult it is for people who want to challenge.
As a region. My name is Mariana Blengio. I come from a very small state in Uruguay. We are not many. We're 3 million and a half, a population of 3.5 million, but we have many environmental problems as many other countries. I had work in different places and from different perspectives. I have been from teaching, and today I am now leading a master's degree on human rights, which has a very strong component on environmental rights as well, because we consider it one of the economic, social, and cultural challenges. But I have also been part of an organization that I suppose you would recognize, such are the public defenders or ombudsmen. I was chair of the ombudsman. I was the ombudsman in my country for 5 years, and during those 5 years, we had the opportunity to accompany, from my role as ombudsman, the approval and ratification of the Escazú Agreement, and later to produce a first report, which is in line and addressed to the government and civil society regarding the challenges of environmental rights as we visualize them. So time went by, and after I came down from my position as ombudsman and continued with my work, with my academic work, I, since April of this year, have been part of this international forum that I share with the colleagues whom I have learned, and now I have learned their illusions and challenges, and hope that we can fill the expectations that we have in this audience today.
Muchas gracias, Mariana.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Andres, Napoli from Argentina. Thank you very much, Patricia, and good afternoon to each and every one. It is a pleasure and an honor for me in particular to be part of this committee with such distinguished colleagues. In my case, I am an attorney. I work in environmental matters. I am also lead a non-governmental organization in Argentina, a foundation, environmental. I was representative of the public. I think that we have to do things with time. I have been working in the Escazú agreement for the last 10 years, and we are now ready to face this new challenge, which is not to build an agreement, is not to convince states to adopt an agreement, but to make it more difficult, that is for the states to comply. And this committee, what it's going to do is to contribute, to help and collaborate, to make this viable. And also, of course, to establish this dialogue that we have built at Escazú to unify the environmental matter with human rights and with the defenders. This is the great challenge that we are having here, and this is what we have proposed ourselves. But for you to understand the work that this committee is having and the functions of the committee, to work jointly and establish a platform to consolidate the region and protect more their people. So thank you very much. Okay. We will now begin then with the presentation that we have prepared for you, and then we will open the space. I don't know where the control is. Let's see. This is complicated. Very well. The Committee of Support to the Application and Compliance was established in Article 18 of the Escazú Agreement. And at the first conference of the parties that was held in Santiago de Chile in 2022, the party states adopted the rules of composition and functioning. There we define the objective and the nature, the structure, the composition, the sessions and the functions, and we establish a basis for the selection procedure for the members of the committee. It was a process that lasted approximately 6 months between the nominations, the review of the curriculum, and subsequently, in April of 2023 in Buenos Aires, this election. Since the beginning, it was considered that the manner in which the Escazú agreement was going to be applied needed an organ, a collegiate organ, to accompany the countries, to guide them in the application and compliance, and to serve the Conference of the Parties. That is why we say that it is a subsidiary organ of the Conference of the Parties. It is a support organ or body, and that its character was going to be consultative to provide a guide and consultancy in a transparent manner, but not to be punitive. That is to say that it cannot apply sanctions, it cannot accuse, but it is a body, an organ to support, for support. And the objective is to promote the application and to support the parties in the implementation of the agreement. Well, these are the members, and this is a photograph of Guillermo, who is not here with us today. Among the functions of the committee, which are quite varied, is to support the Conference of the Parties with informs related to systemic matters. These functions are the ones that are established. Let's remember that our mandate just began, and therefore we are working now on developing this in detail in a document called the Modalities of Work. or work modalities, because the committee up until now has not presented any report, has not prepared any of these functions that should be given in the future. As an informed of systemic matters it's matters that are recurrent in the application or compliance of the Escazú agreement and that need more in-depth analysis in order to guide the steps to be followed. I can also support the party states by visiting their territories to promote the application and compliance, and also to support the public by promoting this significant participation that we have seen until today, and most importantly, the one that has summoned us here today, when you are in situations of risk because of attacks, threats, or intimidations. Let's remember that the official languages of the Escazú Agreement are Spanish and English. It could receive communications, this committee, from a party state or members of the public. And of each of these communications, we have to include this in a registry of cases. And this registry of cases is that where we have to keep all the information, analyze it, and the Secretariat is working on a platform to facilitate the presentation of these communications. And the other point that is important is that each letter addressed to the committee has to be presented through the Secretariat, which is the one that manages the registry of communications, letters, documents that you want the committee to analyze. What a communication could be presented by a party state, by a party state about himself when they require support in the interpretation or application of an article, or by members of the public. And they could be communications could be presented to request support for the compliance or to allege non-compliance of one or more provisions of the agreement. All of these things that I am mentioning to you are included in the Decision 1-3 that was made in Santiago, Chile, called the Rules of Composition and Functioning of the Committee. These communications presented by a party state or by the public go through a process of first of registry and then a process of admissibility to verify that they are presented accordingly. When these communications are presented, the party state or the public can request an audience. The committee decides if it deserves to accept to realize an audience. The second step is that the interested party should present the statements of non-compliance and recommend the measures to be taken, all of these in writing. And then we get to the third phase, which is when the committee writes a report of preliminary conclusions. In those preliminary conclusions, we could eventually summon an audience with the participation of all parties so that in a verbal manner we can discuss the communication. When the committee issues or receives these observations and incorporates them, then we arrive at our final conclusions where we include measures and the pertinent measures. There has to be monitoring of the implementation of these recommendations. And if there is no progress, then the committee could go to the conference of the parties.
So why or how could a communication be declared non-admissible? Well, because the information wasn't included about the management or the processes to resolve that case. So the communication was presented, but it wasn't supported. Or because it has been decided in another international binding process. For example, such as the Inter-American System of Human Rights. It could be that communication is outside of the realm of the agreement, and let's remember that the Escazú Agreement has to do with the rights to access to information, to participation, and this is the context or the scope of its competencies. Or it could also be that communication is presented anonymously, or that it's trivial or even abusive for other reasons beyond promoting the application or the compliance of the Escazú Agreement. One of the points that concerns us the most, and which in this forum we consider to be important, is the way in which significant participation of the public happens in relation to the committee. How can it be that what the Escazú Agreement establishes, how can this be guaranteed and facilitated? The modalities tell us that the public can participate providing information in a systemic report, which could help with information when the situation of a particular state is being analyzed. When we are preparing general observations to interpret the agreement. When there are aspects, factual or legal, of cases of noncompliance. And it is also established that the public has the right to participate in the committee's sessions. So up until now, we have only had one public session, which is the one dated August 10th, during the swearing-in ceremony. But there will be a public session, open session, in November, and there will be one in November, and there will be one in March. And these sessions that are already established within the governance of the Escazú Agreement will be focused on discussing with the public in an open way about the content of the work modalities within which we find ourselves to be collectively analyzing how we can organize our work to be able to execute these functions that I've just explained. It's also possible to participate in the public hearing, which will be called upon with the purpose of having communications. And so what measures could the committee adopt? So the committee mainly formulates conclusions and recommendations, but it could ask one of the states to have an action plan, a report of advancements, or recommend the measures for safeguarding of defenders. There are two time frames that we need to have in mind because they're very important. The first timeline is the committee will not receive communications which discuss the noncompliance of one of the dispositions in the agreement after concluding COP in April 2024, which will take place in Chile. And there is another restriction in time, which is for each country in particular, because we cannot receive communications prior to 1 year from the moment when the agreement came into effect for that member state. So if Colombia, which is what we are all excitedly awaiting, if in November 2023 Colombia enters into effect with the Escazú agreement, there could not be a communication until 15 months later, because it's 3 months while their membership comes into effect, plus 1 year of grace that is given to the member state so that it can show the way in which it will apply and comply with the Escazú agreement. As I was saying, we are working on the work modalities, which is the document that will develop in detail how a communication must be presented, what is required, what the form looks like, etc. And this document will be shared with the board of directors, with the party states, with the representatives from the public, and with the open public in these two open calls that I mentioned. So we have established work connections with similar organizations like the Argus Agreement, which is the homologous agreement of the Escazú Agreement for Europe in terms of the rights to access, with the UN High Commission for Human Rights, with DESCA, which is Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights of the OAS, and the relevant relators or spokespersons in terms of the environmental defenders and human rights defenders. And so we're here to respond to your questions, to listen to your comments. We'll be passing the microphone in the order in which it is requested. We would love to have this space for dialogue with this question. What can we do together? This question, what can we do together? What must this relationship be between the public and the committee so that we can comply with the most important aspect of Article 1 of the Escazú Agreement, which is the application and effective compliance of this agreement? So the floor is open. So rather than speaking, Maria Jose Lubertino of the Red Network of Defenders of Human Rights and Environment and for the Good Living. So I want to congratulate you for your work, and I would like for you to tell us, based on what you've been reflecting upon, what do you think we can do together, and for what will this committee serve, and for what will this committee not serve? Because you must have an idea that our expectations are high, and probably the committee has a more restricted mission. Good afternoon, Hakuyantan. I am from the Shipibo Nation, representing the indigenous nations in the Peruvian Amazon, and we represent the structure of the indigenous movement, 9 regional organizations, 109 federations, 2,400 communities. And we are very concerned, because Peru has not ratified the Escazú Agreement. And I don't know what's going to happen within the action plan of the countries that have not ratified the agreement. So that's one of the concerns that we have. Knowing that in Peru, in the Amazon, more than 30 leaders have been murdered without any justice up until now. So the emblematic case that we mentioned this morning, the Soweto case, it's been 7 years and it's gone back to zero. So this is one of the emblematic cases that we have in Peru, but after this case, there are other cases, 30 leaders who were murdered, in which for the country and for the Peruvian government, this is not a priority on their agenda. And in fact, it's clear that they feel this way because they have not ratified the Escazú agreement. So we're very concerned. I am an indigenous leader. I've been receiving threats personally. There are situations in which we cannot trust, partly because there's a lot of injustice, there's a lot of corruption, and so we know where the attack is coming from, but there is no immediate action. So I'm just giving an example that behind me, there's many people who are in the same situation who cannot speak up for fear of being murdered. So this is why in the morning we mentioned that many of the leaders who have been murdered were coming had been making denouncements in terms of the situation they were facing. One of the cases was the case of Pio Santiago. In the visit of Mitchell Ford, he was saying the threats, he shared the threats that he was receiving, but what did the Peruvian government do? After 1 week, he was dead. Precisely because of defending the rights, because of defending the forest. It's the only heritage that our nations and our ancestors have left us, and we have to continue to care for our forests, because a land without territory, a nation without territory, a nation without a forest is a nation that will disappear. And so I think that this space allows us to see how this can be interconnected, and this is why we're very concerned about what will be the function of this group. So we congratulate the advancements that have been had, but in terms of countries where we are facing critical situations, we're in the first line facing drug trafficking, illegal deforestation, monocultures, palm oil that is eventually really just supported by the government. And so these are situations where we are all in the same boat as the defenders of human rights and of the environment. The Peruvian state has not established who is a defender, who is an environmental defender, who is an indigenous defender. Finally, they're just still discussing, and they don't even know what terms to use. And so this concerned us tremendously, so that instead of moving forward, and just to finish, Peru, when we come to these spaces, it shows an example of having an intersectorial mechanism, which for us is questionable because the indigenous nations are never participating in those spaces. So just to conclude, there's a bunch of laws that protect us, but a bullet can't hold the paper. So this is one of our main concerns. We're really worried, and we will all the same continue participating in these dialogues, but always with a clear proposal. Thank you. So I believe this committee will have a lot of work, and it's very important for all of us for the Escazú agreement to really be applied. And the question is quite short, and this is perhaps not yet resolved. Listening to our colleague, and certainly for sure there are many other cases where the urgency of non-compliance of the agreement by the countries that have signed and ratified and all of this, if the committee when it receives a denouncement or a communication from non-compliance of the state, on behalf of the state of the agreement, they have a time frame for response? And I ask because there could be urgent cases that need to be resolved, and some may not be that urgent. But if this is established, I want to know if this is established for there to be a time frame for requests to be addressed or responded to. Agilio Comaru by the CEP organization. And my question is that although listening to the presentation, how are you interconnecting the indigenous nations? I understand that other countries have signed, but what I see now is I don't see any representative or any indigenous person here on the stage, on the podium. And so I'm wondering, how are you connecting indigenous nations with the countries that have signed. What are the achievements? And we would like for you to explain what achievements and what advancements of the countries that have signed the agreement, the Escazú agreement. Thank you so much. One more, and then I'll come back to you. And then the rest of you who have requested the microphone. Good afternoon, Jose Manuel Arias from Mexico. Just to ask, how far can we see, or what scope can these recommendations have that this committee can issue? Because in the Mexican case, we have organizations that issue recommendations. They serve for two things, for nothing and for nothing. And we have a trinational committee, which in the case of Temex, that also resolves cases in terms of lack of application of environmental law. And we have cases where they give the rights to the complainer for the past 15 years, but nothing has been resolved. So it's worrying. And I would ask how? Or how broad is the scope of these recommendations? And is it, do it if you want? Or where can we place this aspect of this becoming binding for member states? Thank you. And so, Patricia? So thank you for this first round of questions. We're going to try to go from the first to the last, and then we'll be sharing, we'll be all commenting. And Maria Jose from Argentina was asking precisely, what do we think that you can do? And I think that, like all new institution, like the Escazú agreement, is new, and we're only halfway through. The countries need to ratify in the region, so it needs to create consensus. It needs to be installed, and it needs to have a consensus, and it needs for people to know about it. And this is the first element. And so the Escazú agreement, as long as it's not well known, it's not socialized, it won't have the possibility of creating a solid base. And in this sense, it's the first element that we need to work on together so that the agreement can become well known as well as its instruments. And then, of course, it's underlying in each one of your interventions, perhaps of the lack of political will to comply with this one. It's just beginning, and we have many questions around it. But the question is, how can we build together that political will? So from the committee, we will always be working to receive the communications, to be able to work with you, always respecting the framework that Patricia mentioned, because this committee has a normative mandate, and it's a resolution that created it, and these are the limits that it can have. So in the first place, we have to read, of course, Article 18 and to know the scope of the committee. It's a committee, as we said, it's not a tribunal, it's not a punitive committee that can establish sanctions. So it needs to grow from less to more. And this is establishing the recommendations that the countries can comply with. Talking with its countries, and I would say thinking about what can the judges do in terms of what the tribunal or the committee can say, because whether we should be thinking about this process, this is a staggered process, it's an intelligent process. We know that more countries need to come in. It wouldn't serve us if other countries don't enter this agreement, so we need to build this together. This is the first process that we are looking at, and that we will be disentangling as we keep on functioning, at least starting from last year. So this is what I have to say about this. Thank you for your questions and comments. So trying to go from the general to the specific, like when we're at the university or at school. So first of all, international law is subsidiary to internal law. What does that mean? It means that first we need to go to the mechanisms that internal law provides in each one of our countries to then recur to the international mechanisms. That's the first thing that we need to define. And to those of you who have referred to the fact that there are situations that have been ongoing for years in their countries, I would ask whether you have really exhausted all the internal organizations, and then if you've gone to the external international entities that are controlling for human rights. We are not an entity that controls human rights, nor do we replace them. There's two here in Panama, the International Commission for Human Rights and the International Court for Human Rights. So those who have already gone to the Inter-American system, you know, just reminding you that first we need to exhaust internal resources, and then you need to go to the Commission with a request or a denouncement. And then after a process where all of the evidence is verified and there are hearings and there's research and the country sometimes is visited even, then we can define whether the Commission will issue a report with recommendations, and if that report is respected within the time frame that the Commission provides to the state, and then the Commission has to decide whether they pass the case to the court or if they publish the report. So it's a long process, but they have the ability from the Commission to request cautelary measures from the state, and this is something we cannot do. And the court, without the cautelary measures of the Commission, they have the ability to order, and they can, because they are a tribunal, they can order provisional measures even before a case is brought to their attention. This is also an ability that we do not have, so we can issue recommendations. However, we have the ability to provide follow-up to our recommendations, and believe me that we have all the will to do so. But we have the experience that this follow-up will help for our recommendations to effectively be implemented. And in the most urgent cases, we have the will to do what is necessary so that the threats against defenders and their immediate environment and their communities and their organizations, even their families, because we know that that's typically the case of threatened defenders. But everything has a process. There are national focal points of the Escazú Agreement. Some of them are ministries of the environment, some of them are foreign affairs offices, and we need to have follow-up with them. And none of them are public ministry nor the prosecutor's office or anything like this. So reiterate, everything has a process. So we need to be aware of the limitations, and I mentioned it in my first intervention, so that we can have realistic expectations of what we can achieve in each forum, and so that this can support the other efforts that we're making, because the Escazú Agreement and this committee are only one piece of the puzzle. There are many other pieces. And this happens because we need to have an adequate legal defense. And believe me, this is not the first time I'm saying this. I've said this a lot in my country. I've said this to many groups who do a lot of activism. They carry out protests. They gather signatures. They go to the Congress. They do take a bunch of actions, but they don't take any legal action. And so if legal action isn't taken, lawyers are a necessary evil, is what they say. So if there are no strategic alliances with the legal defense organizations in each one of our countries, what are we doing? We need to combine both things. And this is important to be able to exhaust internal resources in the country and then recur to international platforms. Because we're not the only committee of experts from the UN, because we are a committee of UN experts. There's a committee for children's rights. There's a committee for discrimination against women. There's a committee for racial discrimination. There's one of social and cultural rights. So all of these are committees of experts. They issue their opinions. They have thematic exams. There's a Council for Human Rights of the United Nations also. So there's different mechanisms. But what we need to remember is that this is a piece in the puzzle, and we cannot go to the international resources without exhausting internal resources. So this is what I would like to say. And something else, in terms of the integration of the committee, I know that many of you were not in the process of negotiation. In the negotiation process, there was a public regional mechanism that keeps us abreast of what's happening. So if you haven't yet registered, please do so. Secondly, in the negotiation process, we selected representatives from the public who are the ones that are working to try for people to become properly informed, because you cannot share an opinion if you're not informed, and that's the first pillar of the Escazú agreement, access to information. If you don't have access to the adequate information in a timely fashion, you will not be able to participate adequately, nor will you be able to have an influence in the decision-making process. So this is why the public representatives who were elected, so some of the members of the community have been elected to represent the public, and some of them are different. And we're so grateful for everything that you're doing, because this also helps us in our work. But you also need to help them so that they can do their work better. Not just representing them adequately, but also taking the information to where it needs to go. As many of you were not really in the process, you probably know or don't know that in the Escazú agreement, after a tough negotiation, but which surprisingly for our region did not last that long, just a few years, a very delicate consensus was reached to be able to bring on board the largest number of countries. So the agreement has its limitations because it's the product of a negotiation between states. This also needs to be taken into account. It's not perfect, but it can help us to be better with the work that we're going to do together. And this is what we were wondering, what do we think the public can do to help us? Well, help us to perfect the things that were not perfected, and help us to improve them and to strengthen them with the limitations that we have. And there's much to be done there. And also, with those who have arrived now to the process, there's no reason why you should know that there was an election. First, there was a selection process, which ended in December, where everybody was able to participate in this selection process. And only less than 50 persons presented showed up to participate. And so out of that process of selecting these candidates, we had a short list of 10. The states elected by consensus 7. So this is a process that has been ongoing for a while. So we have a 4-year mandate that is renewable for 4 years, and some renewable for 6 years, so that the historic memory of the committee can be renewed. And when our mandate is over, everybody will have the opportunity to be part of the committee. And we hope that many of you participate, so that you can also help to strengthen this process. But if we don't show up, we can't be elected. So I return this concern to you. If I want to truly participate in a process, when I participate, I take risks. I am there, I present my papers, etc. But we cannot expect the committee to be the one that elects itself, because that won't happen. And so the committee is elected by the Conference of the Parties, which is made up of the member states.
Muchas gracias.
Colleagues have said, I totally agree with Andres. I think Escazú has always been a platform which is dependent on what the members of the public make it, right? So a lot depends on, and I think this is why Patricia went through the kind of rules and the scope of the mandate of the committee. A lot depends on how you use those rules and how you use those scopes, the scope that is there. The committee is required to ensure the significant participation of the public, but that only works if members of the public attend dialogues, express issues that they see in implementation and compliance, participate in reports or ask for reports to be done on certain issues, actually use the procedure for communications, either for support for implementation or compliance. These are not self-generating mechanisms that will just result in us being able to do anything without members of the public being really actively involved and understanding those rights. And Escazú is always about understanding and using rights, and I think it will continue to be in its implementation. So significant participation of the public, to me, and the mandate and what can be done, to me, is almost as much as what the public is willing to use this mechanism and learns how to use this mechanism. So the more people who are engaged in your country, the more people who understand the provisions of the agreement, how to use that, I think will make this agreement come to life and actually result in change and reform. I think the process of implementation is as important as the process of compliance, because remember, most of these countries are just starting to seek to implement this agreement. So ensuring that in the countries, in the state parties, this agreement is actually being implemented and being tracked and monitored, what is happening in implementation will really ensure that we can take on the role that we need to take on, both supporting the public and also supporting state parties. So being engaged in the regional mechanism, engaging with the public, the representatives of the public, engaging in the forums and the meetings becomes so essential to make this actual agreement come to life. I will also say that there are many countries who have signed the agreement who have not yet ratified or acceded to the agreement. And I do think that this is still a platform for those countries and those members of the public to participate, to understand what is happening with other countries in implementation, and using it as a mechanism to also advocate in their own countries, like in Peru or in Jamaica, the country I'm from, where we have the state party has signed but not yet ratified. There's still a lot that can be done with participation in this forum and reporting back what happened and asking questions about ratification or accession in this case, I think becomes really, really more important in terms of implementation. And lastly, I would say that the Escazú Agreement itself recognizes the importance of vulnerable groups and indigenous peoples, and that we do make provisions that are appropriate in the cultural and context of those peoples. And so I think that also requires dialogue and understanding. And I think we're all really open to learn. We're all humble in what we're able to do and how we can use this as a mechanism for compliance and implementation. And hopefully there will be opportunities for real partnerships and dialogue with indigenous peoples about the implementation process. Thanks.
Seguimos con
Now we will continue with the second round of comments, and you're going to help me. Yes, but there were hands raised from before. I'm going to ask you to be brief, please. Thank you very much once again. Maria Victoria Chavez from El Salvador. Thank Mr. Felix. In my country, I would say that he's a dream killer, but he's also brings us back to reality, and that is very good. That is very good. I also like to thank the person that just spoke in English. I don't know your name, but thank you. You make us understand. More than a comment, I would like to ask how this committee can support us in a country where no one can speak, and when we speak, they say that we are favoring criminal groups, and that also favor mining companies or extractivist companies. How can you support us? Because for us it is urgent. It is not a matter for tomorrow, it is urgent. So I would like to hear, and to conclude, because I know that many would like to speak, is that please embrace much more the cultural aspect, and to apply all the articles that have to do with it. And I would think that we will not need attorneys, and because when the community says no, it's no. But there is no one that comes and comes for a previous consultation, and that is all for now. I'm going to take a person that were from the previous round, and here, and then over here. Very brief. Good afternoon. My name is Cristian Fernandez from FAM Argentina, and basically I would like to ask, what can the public do to precisely help in the implementation of the agreement, we have to be aware that the committee has a titanic work ahead, and that the public has to be an important collaborator. It is fundamental that civil society and defenders all collaborate with the committee and to denounce all non-compliances of the, also every litigation that we have to use the Escazú agreement as an argument, as a central argument, and basically that collaborate with the defenders as well. Just like we collaborate with the defenders, we have to comply with the committee. We all have to be guardians of the agreement. Good afternoon, Oneida from Colombia. I would not like to sound that I am questioning the committee, because we have to be thankful for this process. But I do have several things that of concern. One is what can we do as public to support? I think that we have already been doing quite a bit. We have been burying the dead, losing our territories. We have been losing the little water that we have left, and we have been losing our lives, being alive, while being alive. And how do I explain this? Because when they displace you, they kill your leadership, they make you go somewhere else. And this is something that we are living. As a contribution, we could do make visible, do lobby in our countries, because Colombia has not ratified the Escazú agreement. But there are also decisions that are framed in political history in our different countries, and that even if there is a political will, there are other powers that are also in charge in our countries. And to conclude, I would like to say that we have to move to a different model, and that is globally. And it might sound crazy to say it, but if we continue like this, we are going to become extinguished. There is not going back for this. There is not going back for what is happening. But we continue advancing in a crazy manner technologically. We continue to use plastic. We continue to do everything that we do not have to do. And we continue from the powerful making agreement models for communities that do not have the same political power. That the only thing that we have left is what a colleague at the table said, to go out and protest after everything that we have. The only solution that we really have to try to be listened is by protesting, socially protesting, and I think that this is a weapon that we're going to need to use from peacefully to manifest or protest, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult, and it's territory for life and not for the minds. I will give the floor now. I have you identified here. Guaranena from the Chagra Women's Association Putumayo in Colombia, Capital, Colombia. I am also an internship of International Matters for Indigenous Matters in Latin America with the United Nations. And I am very pleased that this agreement can be ratified by our government in Colombia, and this is what we hope. However, within this process, we feel nostalgic and empty with regard to the meaning of the defense of our territories when the political will is left to to those who govern. One is the will of the central government, and the other one is the political will of the governments at the level of our localities. And being a follow-up equipment for the Escazú agreement, I ask, what is the strategy that the team is designing to do follow up to these countries that have not yet ratified, as well as the countries that have ratified. If we ask what is the strategy as such, because you, as an international team, only give recommendations, and we say, well, the recommendations arrive in our countries, and it has to do with the political will of the mega projects in the areas that are offered for exploration of gold and copper, as it's been going on in these areas, and from which I come with the voice of the Chagdas Defenders of Life. Thank you. Yes, I have you identified, but let's wait for an answer and then we'll come back. As I said, I come from Costa Rica, one of the countries that led the negotiating process as co-chairman of the board of directors where the Escazú text was adopted. And my country, unfortunately, has not ratified. It was stronger, the pressure of the private sector, with a campaign that comes from Paraguay upwards, filling with questions that the Escazú agreement affects the sovereignty of the countries, when it's one of the principles established that the Escazú agreement limits investment, limits the development of the countries when it actually promotes transparency and accountability and a more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable development, which is what our countries should aspire to. So then we have some countries, and we have to recognize the bravery of having ratified. And those countries we have to support in the implementation and compliance with a hope, because they are party states, because they complied with the procedure. And we have to promote the agreement in the other countries that have not yet ratified. As committee, our competencies cover the party states. It does not cover the signatory states. The signatory states are observers of the process of the Escazú agreement. But the recommendations and the conclusions can not arrive to them because they are not part of the process. At some point, they were left in the middle of the road, and they only observe. And this is something that has to be reversed, but it has to be reversed with mobilization, with social mobilization that demands that it would be signed, the Escazú agreement be signed and ratified in the states. And in that sense, the reach of the committee, what it can do is only to support in the dissemination of the Escazú agreement in all countries of the region, and not only in the party states. So we have limitations, but we also have hope. And this process has to grow and incorporate more and more sectors so that it could be felt in the legislative powers, which are the ones that have the word, and for it to grow. So I am very sorry to say that our competencies do not reach signatory states, and those states need it more than the party states. But there is a commitment to disseminate, to support the civil society that has been mobilized, that demands that its country is become a party state. Let me complement with this idea of hope. I think we are at a complex moment of the region. The complexity of flourishing in terms of hope, so that our rights are going to be more ample and implemented. On the contrary, and I say this from Argentina, and this is a process that needs to support each other from within the countries that have ratified to generate information to know what is going on, whether it's implemented or not, and for those who have not ratified, to support them in that ratification. And I think that what we're doing here, a network of hope, because to have more rights and to work. So what is the Escazú agreement for me? I am an attorney. I have worked on social and environmental litigation. It is a tool, and when you're offered a tool, you do not throw it away because you say, well, that tool has not served me. No, you use it again and you ratify it again. I think that hope and the idea of becoming stronger in matters of tools is what is going to make us grow, and that is what we have to think about in terms of hope. I want to highlight the interventions of each of you, starting with Argentina and other countries. I do not have the names, but yes, the origins, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador. And they are showing the mosaic that we are. An interesting, very interesting mosaic that I believe the agreement is showing also. And I would also like to highlight the agreement as an advance, which is also beginning to crawl, but it is a very interesting advance in the region and for the world because it is a unique agreement. We do have some type of background in some other parts in the world, but it doesn't have all the characteristics that this international agreement has. And as every treaty and we only know the agreement, but I think we all know the agreement. We have to go out and have a multiplying effect, because if you do not know your right, you could not convoke it. And in this case, guarantees have been generated. We are very recent, of course, and the great challenge is that we have to reach those who have no idea that the guarantees and defense mechanism exist. So I think that this is an excellent starting point to renew a commitment that goes beyond those who know the subject, and we have to make it reach each and every one. So thank you for all your interventions, and we want you to know that we are working on something that is going to really begin to work with communications, as was said in the presentation, beginning in April of 2024. So we do have a good period of time to work and multiply this, which is the Escazú Agreement.
Bueno, vamos a la
We will now continue with the last round. Good afternoon. Firstly, I am concerned as indigenous people from the Peruvian Amazonia that we come all the way here to make our problems visible, the problem of defenders. Within that context, I am concerned of what mechanisms are going to be implemented for the indigenous peoples, because we feel, at least I feel, that we are going in just one direction. We are going as if we all had the same condition, where there are DAs and police officers, where we can go to and ask for a guarantee and that police could defend us. But in the case of the indigenous people that we live in the forest, that suffer the threats, what do we do? What do we do there? I ask the Secretariat or the committee, what mechanisms are going to be implemented for the indigenous people? I have also seen that we need more representation. We need to have a specific representation for the indigenous people, not only of civil society, but to have an indigenous representative that should be the voice of the indigenous people. And I have felt this personally, this event. Many of us of the indigenous people have been questioned because precisely the organizers do not know what the type of dress that we use. The people from Amazonia, the indigenous people. Each people has its own costumes, each people has its own dresses. And you can be assured that you have not had the problems that we suffered. So I summon the United Nations to please take into account the participation of the indigenous people. We are recognized in the Convention 169, and therefore we need to also be treated equally, of course, but not only in word and in writing, but only with actions. And I make this presentation and I call all the organizers to take into account the fact that the indigenous people have always been invisible and used, but we are now present here to bring in the voice of our people. Thank you. Good afternoon to each and everyone. Jorge Acevedo from Ecuador. I have not heard, perhaps U.S. committee are planning, but at least something that I think is important, the link with the public, the committee, and the implementation is the possibility to have thematic audiences in each, or hearings in each state, to visit the states where the organizations, environmental organizations, human rights and indigenous people organizations can participate directly and personally with the committee, evidently on Escazú matters, listening to the state so that you can also have a more personal knowledge and interaction in each of the countries with the organizations and with the so that recommendations are more grounded, and also that would allow to generate more visibility of the Escazú and at a national level, given the visit and the event that would give more knowledge and the recognition, and so that you can support the implementation and for the state to be more questioned or receive more recommendations, let's put it that way, to advance in the criteria that emerge from the committee. Thank you.
Hola.
Good afternoon. My name is Carolina from Brazil. I bring ideas from the work on the ONU Mujer workshop yesterday. First, to let you that we know the limitations of the Escazú agreement, and this morning this was made clear. But we are going to have a new tool that is very well fine-tuned to be a good tool, and this is the space and the moment to do this, so that you received our critics and contributions, because we are here with the hope for better work conditions for all of us. Yesterday we spoke about the importance of having a mechanism, training and support mechanism for the communities to present a report or to the committee when the agreement was violated, and we have to provide proof. This is not a simple matter, and it is important for the committee to provide support to the representatives of the public, of the civil society, in order to make possible to make good reports to this committee, and especially to the compliance committee. And lastly, is the need to train jurists and attorneys for this tool to be used on a daily basis. Thank you.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. My name is Beltrán Sal from the TUI. I belong to Aquicho Etna. I am Peruvian. I am the president of the Regional Organization of Indigenous People of the East. I would like to participate this afternoon with this United Nations Committee to express some concerns that are extremely important for the Peruvian Amazonia. The Escazú Agreement is a very important material to be implemented in all nations where we defend rights, whether environmental rights of the forest. But in Peru, this has not been respected. I believe, speaking, that perhaps in other countries, but in Peru, to obtain rights, despite the fact that there are written rights in the political constitution that we have, but they're not complied with. For the compliance of all of this, we as indigenous people have to fight, press the government, and to have the support of those who cooperate. Because I come from an area that it produces oil where the rights of the indigenous people have been violated. We are an indigenous community that support the rights of the brothers that have not been contacted, this type of person exists. They do not have a house. They do not have addresses. They live in the forest as animals. And we defend their rights. And because we defend their rights, the government is against us and says that we are an obstacle for the development of our country. What the most important is to defend the life of these people that are part of the Amazon. For us, this is a marvel, a person that has never been contacted. So what can we do for these brothers to have the rights respected? Perhaps to call the government to meetings. That doesn't provide solutions. Among ourselves as indigenous people, we have organized ourselves and we have gone against the government. And this is what has given results for us today. We have what we have achieved has been the result of our fight. And for this Escazú agreement to be applied in other countries, I think that the same thing has to happen. And sometimes there has to be bloodshed and death for the government to listen to us. I am a leader that have 3 reports against the government because I do not agree with the work that my government is doing, because we are not in agreement. Despite the fact that we live in a country that has many resources, we do not have development in health, in education. We are in a worse condition, but we have to claim our rights together. Thank you for listening to me.
Buenas tardes, soy Christopher.
Good afternoon. My name is Christopher Castillo. I am from the network in Honduras, presenting Escazú. I think I'm the only person from Honduras who's able to come here, and I just want to say we can't take the eyes, stop focusing on the ball, not just for us, but the fact that it's a capitalist model that is suppressing us, that is oppressing us. It's a racist model, a patriarchal model, and that this model is precisely there because the states are accomplices to this. All of our efforts are along the lines of the states listening to things. I think things need to be named by their name. The states are murderers. All the extractive projects that we are facing in our territories, all of these projects are accompanied by a militarization process, not only of military bodies from the states that we come from, but also from the United States and other countries. And this is important to mention, and it is important to not forget this. To say, moreover, that all of the agreements can be improved. We can create hundreds of laws. I think that the legalistic logic of things will not really meet eye to eye with the territories because the state and its laws are considered to continue the colonial model. The republic is a continuation of the war against the nations. And if we forget this, we will continue decade after decade demanding that the states listen. The states are not going to listen because the states and the governments are accomplices and they are part of a private enterprise, which is the same one that signs with a transnational after listening to the committees of risk analysis from the defenders. I lived 23. It was a first order to be captured with several cautionary measures from the International Committee for Human Rights, and nothing has happened in Honduras. What has happened is that the state has said that they do not agree with the Escazú Agreement, and they have not said no to the law that will turn Honduras in 2050 into the first state globally that is planning to disappear in order to become the first state in the world that is governed exclusively by business people. There will be nobody there. There's the first law for genetic experimentation in Honduras, which will be launched next year to mix humans with plants and humans with machines and humans with animals. Nobody talks about this ever. How much longer will we be waiting to fight against the main issue, which is the model of the oppressing capitalist?
¿De verdad hablo 2 minutos?
Sí, sí. Sí. Hola, buenas tardes. Bueno, mi nombre es Samantha Delgado.
Hello, my name is Amanda Delgado. I am part of the Organization of Indigenous Women, Recha Chawarmi, Argentina. And I think it's fundamental, precisely this space, to ask questions and clarify things, because I share what Carolina said. The committee is the space within the Escazú Agreement to guarantee the compliance. And within this framework, I understand that only as of April next year will this committee begin functioning. So we have September through April for organizations in the territories, etc., and indigenous communities for us to work together with the organized committees and to see how this is going. And so my question is, how can we move ahead with this work? How do we do this? Because in this case in Argentina, in my province, we can follow a process of constitutional reform where the Escazú Agreement did not comply with it from Article 1 to the end. We're criminalizing environmental defenders. There was no type of indigenous consultation nor citizen participation. And right now, my brothers and sisters are on hunger strike and closing roads, and they are chained. And so between now and April, there's many months. And if the committee is not working, okay, we understand. What can we do to move forward with this? What can I do in my territory and tell my people? What can I say? How do we communicate so that they're not bureaucratic, so that they are not declared non-admissible? So my question is concrete. So we have 2 last interventions. Hopefully they'll be too short. No, I'm sorry, these 2. Thank you. Stefano Josefina from Oaxaca, Mexico. And so one of my interventions is that for this committee to be inclusive and for it to include members of indigenous communities so that we can understand indigenous thinking and its relationship to the territory. And the other is, if this is a tool to denounce the injustices of the extractivist businesses in our territory, if you can, a committee can make more visits to our countries and also to the countries that are not within the Escazú Agreement. But if your work is to denounce or to at least share our words, our message, then I would really like that to actually happen. Thank you. Hello, Marcelo Sabuc from the Committee of the Altiplano in Guatemala. The state of Guatemala subscribed the Escazú Agreement in 2018, but it's still pending on the ratification. Before you, it was said that there are 78 denouncements from Guatemala. What would happen with these denouncements? Will they move forward if the Guatemalan state does not ratify the agreement? And the other question is, what is the organization that can pressure states for them to comply with or ratify their commitment within the Escazú Agreement? Thank you.
Bueno, vamos a tratar de dar respuesta a la mayor cantidad.
So we'll try to respond as much as possible to the comments. So it's clear that we cannot act in the cases of countries that have not ratified the Escazú Agreement. What we can do is promote their ratification. That's within our mandate. And along those lines, you can depend on our collaboration that we are certain can be useful at different levels. Now, to be able to visit a country that could be requested to the committee within the framework of a communication when we are authorized to receive them, so as of April next year, and with the limitations that have already been expressed, we need the blessing from that country, and we will be requesting it in the cases where it is necessary, where we have received or where we think it is necessary to have a visit, whether it has been requested or not. But if we think it's convenient, we will be managing this. But it all depends on the state. And this is the case in all the mechanisms, including the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights. With regards to the cultural topic and the topic of native nations, believe me that all of those of us that are here are very sensitive with regard, sensitized to this topic, and we recognize the differences. We understand the cosmovision of the different nations and that each nation has its own, and there are many nations in the region. So we know that it's a complex issue. And we're always open to continue learning, and I think that the public, and I speak of the public because that's the word that was chosen for this process, because we don't want to exclude anybody. On the other hand, obviously, in here I have nothing to say. All of those of you that are here are legitimized to make their respective causes visible, to make your claims and to share what you have shared, because nobody who didn't come from your territories has better legitimacy to do so. So we have nothing to say on that. We respect that, and believe me that you will always find that respect from us. Now, we need to work within the limitations that we have. Whether we like it or not, we have a legal system that at the international level recognizes the states as subjects of rights, and where within this process, exceptionally, it's the only one in the world up until now, the public has participated in the decision-making process. So it's important to recognize, to acknowledge this, and to remember this constantly. And I'd like to reiterate the regional public mechanism is there precisely because that mechanism is also the one that is used to select the representatives from the public. So please use it. In the meantime, with the current public representatives, approach them, get familiar with them, work with them. We all have to work with what we have because we have nothing else. This is what we have. This is what there is. And we are included in that. The committee is what there is. You have to work with the committee. So work with us. With regards to all of these concerns that we have, look, I have very dear friends in Peru and in Colombia. I'm familiar with the very complex realities that you live. This is only one of the multiple elements of this complex realities. In the case of the native nations, even more so. And believe me that we suffer a lot of what you have expressed because many of us have also been persecuted. We have also been unfairly accused of things. And we have also been object of threats. So we are not foreign to any of that, or none of that is foreign to us. Or we know people who have lost loved ones, or we have lost battle colleagues along the way. And so we are sensitive to this also, and it is very painful to us, this reality, and it hurts us a lot to not be able to do more in the cases where we would like to be able to do more. So please rest assured that from where we are, we will do everything that we can to help. It will not be easy, and we know it. We are not in the field, in the territories, and definitely we will never fully understand 100% what you are living. We recognize that. But within our reality, believe me that we will do everything that is necessary so that at least this committee works. And it will not be a committee that serves for nothing and for nothing. You can rest assured of that. Thank you.
Muy brevemente, y para contestar la pregunta de nuestra compañera argentina, ¿qué podemos decir?
So briefly, to respond a question from the Argentinian colleagues, so what can we do from between now and April when the work of the committee will start? So we have foreseen a number of consultations, and these will, of course, be with the public, with the representatives of the public. Patricia mentioned it before, with the states, with the leading work table, so that you can become familiar with and get involved in the work modalities, which is a complement of the rules and where we have the procedure. And this is where we hope that you will be able to become familiar with this instrument and, in principle, get involved and establish input so that we can take them into account. So this is a very short period of time, but we want to take advantage of it with a series of consultations. So we will be working on this. Of course, you will be involved in every plan of strengthening capacities and direct dialogue. And here you will have the presence of the members of the committee. And if we have a visit, then the entire committee will be there.
We definitely, as I think Felix said so beautifully, recognize the work of environmental human rights defenders, their lives, the importance of what they represent and what they've done to protect the environment, to secure their rights. And we will try with great sensitivity to live up to the expectations that I think all of you have spoken about at this meeting. Very practically, I love the question about what practically can we do. We really need your involvement in crafting working modalities that will work for defenders, indigenous peoples, women, youth, so that this agreement can come to life and can work for all of you and be a tool of power for people, and also to support the states to reform and change their laws, policies, and practices. So being a part of and commenting on the working modalities, which we are now developing these detailed rules of how you send a communication, how do we have a hearing, when can we come to a territory, how do we put on a dialogue. It may seem procedural and detailed, but having them really respond to your needs, I think, is really a critical thing. So I would say definitely prioritize being involved in the dialogues that we're going to hold to determine and finalize those modalities. I think that's a priority. I also love the idea, and we've talked about the importance of training and capacity building around communications, how to use the platform once we have it, how to ensure that both non-lawyers, so it's not just lawyers who can participate, but non-lawyers can participate and use the procedures under this agreement is really, really important to us. So your thoughts about how we make sure that that happens, how do we make sure people can learn from each other about how to use these procedures in a way that meets their needs would be really, really important to us. And then just lastly, thank you for being here. Thank you for all your comments. Please feel free to reach out to us. I think Patricia put the email that represents the way that you can correspond to the committee. Please do not feel that you can't use that. It's a practical way to get in touch with us, to follow up with us on your questions, on your concerns, and some of the challenges that you're experiencing, either in your countries that are parties, but even in countries that are not yet party. There still is, when a country signs an agreement, an indication of their intention for it to be binding. It's not binding yet, but it's an indication of their interest in the agreement. So I think even having your thoughts and concerns reflected and shared to us will be important for us as we also promote the importance of this agreement in the region. Thanks.
Creo que es muy alentador.
I think it's very encouraging that today in this hall, as well as people that come from countries or regions that have ratified the agreement, that there are many who come from regions that haven't. That is something that to me is making a difference. It's showing a common denominator in a cause that is common, and so I want to highlight that, because that is a flame that can allow precisely this push projecting this agreement. And in terms of what to do moving forward, I would say that every day is an opportunity to teach what environmental rights are. Even though it seems to all of us that we know it, many people are coming from a space of lack of knowledge. So aside from knowing what the tool is to denounce it, also just to know what the access to the rights, access to information, to participation, and to justice. So I want to reiterate that I think that this is a task that doesn't end when the treaty is ratified or when it's approved in the conference, nor when it's ratified by a member state, or when it's going to be ratified by future states, or when this committee emits its first resolution. It's a constant task that makes it such that it calls us to what it means to work in human rights. And working in human rights is an endless task. It is renewed every day. So thank you for being here, and I hope that we can multiply this task, assuming it beyond it being an obligation, but rather as an ethical duty. Thank you very much. So I think we're reaching the end of this session for exchange and dialogue. After this, it will be projecting a very interesting movie. We hope that you will stay here in the hall. But on behalf of the committee, just want to thank each and every one of you for your presence. This shows how this forum from yesterday and how we were working today on preparing, and in the next couple of days, we show how alive the Escazú agreement is and the joint ties in terms of working together that keep getting stronger. So it's the first session that we have that's open to the public, but it will not be the last one. And we trust that we will maintain these spaces open with you. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon.